My grandmother never poured the first cup for herself. She said the first cup reveals too much. I thought she meant fortune telling until the night her secret almost burned our town down again.
I'm Nadia, 26, a reporter who lost her job for telling the truth a little too loudly. When the city spit me out, I landed where I swore I'd never return. Grandma Evelyn's house, white porch, climbing roses, a town that pretends it has no shadows. Every Thursday, 4 women met in her parlor for tea, pastel dresses, pearl earrings, laughter that sounded like lullabies. They called themselves the Rose Tea Club. I called them adorable. On my first Thursday back, Grandma squeezed my hand and said, "Listening is braver than talking." I smiled, because what do you say to a woman whose kindness feels like a sermon? I didn't know she was teaching me how to survive.
The tea arrived the way it always did. Kettle sigh, porcelain chime, steam like breath on glass. The women talked in a language that wasn't quite code and wasn't quite gossip. "Did you prune the east bed?" one asked. Took care of the root," another said. They all hid their smiles in their cups. It was sweet, until it wasn't. Halfway through the meeting, Grandma's face drained. Her teacup rattled. The room turned to ice. We eased her to the sofa, rang the doctor, and when the chaos settled, I stayed behind to clean. I wanted to help. Maybe I wanted to feel useful again. That's when I knocked over the rose-patterned tea tin. It hit the floor with a hollow clack. Loose leaves scattered like confetti over tile, and the bottom of the tin slid an inch. A false panel. Inside, yellowed clippings, names underlined in red. A black and white photograph of 4 young women in summer light, one of them my grandmother, each holding a teacup like a badge. On the back, in Grandma's hand, "For when the weeds return." I didn't sleep that night. Journalists are terrible at ignoring doors left ajar. The next morning, I asked her carefully if she'd ever known the old mayor everyone whispered about, the one who took donations from factories and turned zoning maps into weapons. She stirred her tea as if it were a lake. "Some weeds," she said, "don't die. They just change gardeners." I laughed because I didn't understand. By sunset, I did.
I started reading. The clippings told stories I'd never been taught. A factory collapse that killed 3 men because safety money was siphoned to a campaign. A land grab couched as revitalization. An investigation that vanished like mist. Each article had notes in the margins, dates, names, arrows, like someone mapping a storm. Over the next week, I visited each of Grandma's friends. Lorraine, whose hands were always warm. June, who looked gentle until you met her eyes. And Dot, who still sharpened her pencils with a knife. I asked about the club. They laughed. I asked about the photograph. They didn't. Eventually, silence loosened. "Evelyn was the brave one," Lorraine said, thumb on a teacup chip. "She looked like mercy. People confessed to mercy." "And you?" I asked. "We learned to set a table no one saw coming," June said. "Truth tastes better on porcelain." Piece by piece, I assembled a history that felt like fiction. The Rose Tea Club began in the 1960s, not as a social group, but as a quiet rebellion. They had no money, no badge, no power anyone respected. So they used what they had: access, attention, and a town that underestimated women who baked pies and remembered everything. No fire, no poison, no fist. Just a rumor dropped at the right doorstep. A photocopied ledger slipped to the right clerk. A staged, accidental encounter that shook a guilty man's faith in his own alibi. A mayor resigned. A developer relocated. A charity actually became a charity. The town got better, or at least behaved. And then life did what it does. Time took their husbands, children left for cities. The club that had been a weapon softened into routine. Tea, laughter, roses. Until now. Because now the former mayor's son, smooth smile, polished shoes, same last name, was running for office on restoring dignity. The same night I learned that, Grandma set an extra place at the table. For who? I asked. For the truth, she said. I told myself I was done digging. I told myself I was a guest, not a witness. And yet, when I watched the town fall back in love with a familiar lie, my hand shook. I knew the pattern. Speeches about family, photographs at church doors, promises that smelled like wax and cost like bone. I confronted Grandma in the kitchen, the kettle shrieking like it could feel the heat. You can't do this again, I said. You can't start a war with teacups. She turned off the flame. Sweetheart, she said, we never started a war. We put out one. By destroying people? No, she said gently, by revealing them. I thought of the photograph, 4 young women holding teacups like shields. I thought of the men in those clippings, their signatures, their smirks, their certainty. I thought of the 3 dead in that collapse. I had their names now. Tell me, I said, all of it. She did. Not as a boast, never that, but as a ledger she'd carried alone for too long. Truth without mercy becomes punishment. Mercy without truth is permission. We learned to pour both. The plan, when it came, felt impossible and obvious. The candidates' gala was 3 Fridays away. A fundraiser with a stage and a screen and a list of donors long enough to block out the sun. The club would serve tea the way they used to, all smiles and lace, while I, disgraced, unemployed, inconvenient, would do the one thing I still knew how to do, verify and deliver. Dot slipped me a USB drive wrapped in wax paper. Open it only when you've prayed, she said. I don't pray, I said. Then count to 100, she said, slowly. The drive held bank transfers, email threads, memos so brazen I checked the metadata twice. Money meant for a children's clinic had been temporarily reallocated to real estate purchases that just happened to sit under shell companies that just happened to trace back to a best friend who just happened to own the campaign's media firm. I built a simple deck any intern could run, time-stamped files, clean arrows, no theatrics. Lorraine got us on the volunteer list with a phone call and a lemon cake. June taught me to carry a tray like a confession. Grandma showed me where to stand so I could see the whole room. Listen, she whispered as the chandeliers flickered on. Don't look. Listen. The guilty always make music. The gala was a cathedral to plausible deniability. Silverware like mirrors, laughter like glass, a podium that looked too clean. The candidate worked the room like a shepherd. People leaned in when he spoke, relief on their faces like a heat lamp. We are so hungry for certainty that we'll eat it raw. At 8:15, I stood at the AV cart with a volunteer badge and a stomach full of bees. On stage, the candidate lifted his hands, Behind him, a welcome slide beamed the town's name like a lullaby. Grandma circled the edge of the room, refilling cups that didn't need refilling. The other women took their places the way a story takes a breath. I plugged in the drive. The screen stuttered, the welcome slide hiccuped. Then a bank transfer filled 20 feet of wall. Money out, money in, dates that match photo ops, captions in plain English. The room went as silent as a snowfield. Someone laughed, one sharp bark like a car backfiring. A glass hit the floor. The candidate's smile didn't crack. It evaporated. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his mic caught the tremor, "we're experiencing..." Slide 2, slide 3. Emails with subject lines like "rediversion" and "may need to paper this." I didn't add music. The truth doesn't need a soundtrack. Beside me, the AV kid whispered, "We're gonna get fired." "Not tonight," I said. I felt Grandma before I saw her. She touched my elbow like a benediction. Her voice was soft, aimed only at my bones. "Justice tastes better without sugar," she said. Security moved in slow motion, the way people do when the future is changing and their feet haven't caught up. Someone cut the projector. Someone else plugged it back in. The crowd's murmur turned into a weather pattern. The candidate tried to speak again. He said the word "context," and then, like a man caught in a riptide, he reached for "fake." But documents don't blush. They don't blink. They sit there, immaculate and merciless. By the time the lights came up fully, the room had shrunk around him. People who'd smiled with both rows of teeth began to practice neutrality. Phones glowed like fireflies. Somewhere, the decision had been made. Not ours. I looked at Grandma. She nodded once, satisfied not with ruin, but with clarity. That distinction matters. It's the only thing that keeps a woman like her from drowning in her own reflection. We left before the first siren.
The town did what towns do. It argued with itself. It pretended it had always suspected. It rewrote yesterday at lunch. The campaign suspended itself, then snapped apart. The clinic received a donation that made the nurses cry in the supply closet, which told me that despite everything, something like grace still walks our streets. Grandma grew quiet. She wouldn't say she was tired. She would say she was done. She would sit on the porch, watching the rose bushes climb the rail and hum hymns as if the vines needed lullabies. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, a single cup on the table and no kettle on the stove. The first chair, the one she never used, was empty. "You can have it now," she said, and touched the rim of the cup. "You know how not to drink it." I didn't understand until I did. She died 3 days later, in her sleep, as if the body had finally been convinced the work would go on without it. In her will, she left me the rose bush cuttings and the tea tin. The false bottom was gone. In its place, a note: "Every thorn has its reason. Make sure yours is mercy." I moved back to the city with more softness than I left it. On Thursdays, I still pour tea, 1 cup for the truth, 1 cup for mercy. The first goes to neither. I keep it empty, a reminder that you can reveal and still refrain. That sometimes the bravest reporting is knowing when a story ends, not when it explodes. People ask me what the Rose Tea Club really was. Vigilantes? Saints? Witches? They were women who learned the physics of power in a place that denied they had any. They were gardeners. They cut at the root. They watered what they could save. When I tell this story, I don't celebrate the fall of a man who thought he deserved a town. I celebrate a generation who taught me to measure before I pour. My grandmother never took the first cup. She let the truth have it.
And when the steam cleared, she left room for mercy. That's what I serve now. Hot, honest, and just enough to heal. If this story stayed with you, share it with one friend who loves a good mystery with heart. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave me a comment with a rose so I know you found the secret in the tea.